Hi, you're listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast presented by Draftkings. Draftkings is an official betting sponsor of the NFL, and just so you know, it's legal in Arizona right now, and if you are not hopping on Draftkings, you should be, because here's what you got to do. You download the app, you throw in code word PHNX, and then you bet $1 on an NFL game, and then you get $200 to play with. Now, if you're smart, you're going to ignore basically all of my suggestions when it comes to what you do with your money. But you know what? DraftKings, as John Schuster has talked about, is one of the easier ones to navigate. And the great thing about it, too, is that everybody knows about DraftKings. It's not like, it's some fly-by-night thing. It's here. Everybody knows about it. And you know what? Quite frankly, it's not going anywhere. So I would hop on there. I would just ignore basically everything that I have to say, though, at this point. And one thing, though, that I would tell you, though, if you do have a gambling issue, you should call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, and they can get you set up there. But like I said, you know what? I put in some money on DraftKings. I'm not good at this. So basically in the future, when I have a Luke's Locks, basically ignore what I have to say and go in the other direction. But, John Schuster, let's talk a little bit about the University of Arizona Wildcat football game tonight. And the U of A, well, you lost 38-14 in a game that really didn't even feel that close. And I got caught up a little bit in the sauce here, and that I watched the first BYU game, or the first game of the season against BYU, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, Arizona didn't look out of place. They fought, they battled, but a very wise man I know named John Schuster also said, Mike, the biggest difference is always going to be from game 1 to game 2. That's when you find out really kind of where everything resides. And you know what, Shu? You were spot on that one, my man. You got the floor.
Every once in a while, the old man comes up with things that work themselves through. From an Arizona fan standpoint, it's understandable that we were hoping that wasn't necessarily the case, but this was a bludgeoning. 21 points in a 7-minute span. San Diego State rattled off big plays through the air and on the ground, and then got a big special teams touchdown as well. And Arizona could not move the ball and get anything going offensively. So the frustration here, and there are a bunch of them, is that now, if this San Diego State game had happened, 8 days ago, before the BYU performance, you come through with the San Diego State game, you say, yeah, okay, that's a game that's a game to think the Cats can pluck, but by the same token, there isn't a lot of talent on this team. So if San Diego State comes into Tucson and wins that game, that's a big deal. For prognosticators, and you've talked about this, I think a lot of the over-under lines on the season, on the number of wins for Arizona, was 2.5. So if you took the over on 2.5, when you were able to bet this a couple weeks ago, this is a game that you needed. This was a pivotal game. So, from that standpoint, there are some folks out there who might be a little bit concerned in regards to that. But putting that off the table, Arizona was completely exposed tonight. San Diego State's game plan was outstanding. And it's understandable what Arizona was trying to do, stop the run and make San Diego State beat them through the air. So what did San Diego State do? They beat them through the air, and they still ran the football.
You know what a big problem for me, though, in this game was? This was not a vintage, and you could tell it feels weird talking about a vintage San Diego State football team, but I think you know where I'm getting at there. This, to me, was a little bit different, though, Schuster, in that across the board, San Diego State looked bigger. They looked more athletic. They looked like they had better skill position players. Quite frankly, they looked like they just had better players across the board. And we talk about it from time to time, how many players from one team would start on another team. And I looked at that San Diego State team, and I'm thinking to myself, outside of maybe like Stanley Berryhill and maybe one or two other players, I don't know that anybody's starting at San Diego. And that's a problem, and it shows you how far the Jedd Fisch has to go with the roster, with the program that he's inherited at this point.
There's always good news. We have to understand that this is a long-term work in progress, and there are going to be difficult games like this. I think the frustration tonight is multifaceted because a lot of people thought, a lot of gamblers thought that Arizona, based on its BYU performance, that San Diego State, based on a performance against a New Mexico State team that isn't very good, was, maybe going to get an opportunity to get a W here at home. All of that made sense. But San Diego State came into this with a game plan, a lot of confidence, and dialed it up very nicely. One of the things I think that you're going to see a lot with a defense that is going to take a lot of chances is there are going to be games where you get burned. This is probably not the only time this happens to Arizona this year. It's going to be fun sometimes when they get tackles for losses. They've still got to force turnovers and haven't done that now in 2 games. And, the game plan from the Aztecs, from Brady Hoke and his coaching staff, was outstanding. And 8 concerns about their quarterback based on tonight's performance were absolutely put to rest. The game plan makes sense. I mean, okay, San Diego State ran for about 250 against New Mexico State. They couldn't throw the football. The QB was 6 for 19. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to do? Make the QB beat you? And I thought one of the things that was sort of interesting and indicative early on, we heard a lot, Mike, in the summer about the great joke about Arizona's offense, how you're going to see the tight end right. used a lot at Arizona in games at Arizona Stadium. What we didn't anticipate is it was going to be San Diego State that used the tight end a lot and racked up about seemingly 200 yards in the process.
And let's talk a little bit about the tight end here, because that to me was a bad harbinger of things to come. Because San Diego State, when the tight end streaks across the field and down the sideline for a touchdown, it looked like he was moving in slow motion. This wasn't exactly Rob Gronkowski we were talking about, and Arizona guys just couldn't catch him. There were 2 startling things for me in this game, especially to start out the game. One was that San Diego State was much bigger, more physical, just more athletic. The second, and this was not the one that this was the one that really surprised me. I did not see Arizona being in the situation where they were going to miss so many tackles. I felt bad in a weird way for Don Brown, because how many times was a guy in position to make a tackle and, oh, by the way, he goes for the guy's ankles, guy gets up, high steps, goes down the field. There were multiple touchdowns where Arizona had 2 or 3 cracks at the ball carrier, and they just whiffed. As a defensive coordinator, that's got to be the biggest complaint that you have. What else am I supposed to do? I've schemed to put you in the right position right there. I'm not asking you to run with somebody you can't run with, but if somebody's right in front of you, I need you to be able to tackle. So to me, it was a little bit of a bunch of events that kind of like converged on each other here, and that you don't have a lot of talent. And oh, by the way, when you were put in position to make plays, you just couldn't.
What Arizona has to do, and I get that it sounds stupid and it sounds, obvious. It's both of those things. But when you are talent deficient, you have to do the little things right. Against BYU, they did. And that gave us, I don't want to say it's false hope. Who the hell knows? By the time we get into week 3 or week 4, maybe Arizona fixes some of this stuff because they just got embarrassed in front of nobody who went to their stadium in their debut home game. So, it's a good learning tool. It's a good coaching tool for Don Brown and, the folks on the defensive side of the ball. But Arizona took a huge step backward. Not only, and this happens when things steamroll on you. Instead, it's when you get down, somebody makes a big play, scores fast, makes another big play, scores fast. Then you start to get out of the fundamentals, out of the execution, and then you make mistakes. And that's when it starts to just become a mess. You want to obviously go into games and win. But we know where Arizona is right now, and we know that there's a long-term investment that's going to take place. There are going to be some improvements, and there are going to be some frustrations. Tonight was unquestionably a frustration. However, one of the things that you talked about, and you've brought it up a couple times, and I think it's kind of interesting. It harkens.
Oh, you're skeptical about what you're about to say. You're skeptical. I can tell. I'm telling you what you're thinking right now.
You probably do, but maybe you don't. You hearkened back to Arizona's lack of relative talent when compared to San Diego State. But you're a recruiting guy. You've followed recruiting a lot. You know that Arizona has been basically beating out directional schools for talent. And they haven't Diego State. So who's got better talent? I get that they're in a better conference, and as a result of being in a better conference, they should have better people. But San Diego State right now, since 2015, I heard the radio broadcast talk about this. They've got the 12th best record in football. Nobody talks about them. And going into this year, because they had the first game where it looked bad against a subpar opponent, even though in fairness, I guess they scored 28 points in the second half and started to get things, controlled a little bit. San Diego State's good. And they proved it to a large degree, I think, tonight, or took a really good step. When we talked a couple days ago, you mentioned they were without 70% of their starters. That's a big deal for a lot of programs. But if you still have some talent in the pipeline, then your program's on solid footing. And right now, there's no question that San Diego State is way ahead of the curve than Arizona at this stage.
You know what I underestimate? They lose 60% of their guys, 50% of their guys, whatever the case may be. Again, this is a bad comparison, but I'm going to throw it out there. Alabama loses 7 first-round picks. Nobody cares. They're going to be the first team in the country, or the first. San Diego State, to me, is obviously a much smaller example of that, but are they almost at the stage now where they're going to be year in and year out, no matter who they lose, an 8, a 9, a 10-win team? Because that's what it felt like. Watching San Diego State out there, even though they didn't look great against New Mexico State, they had a quarterback out there that was good enough. And when you're good enough and you've got a running back like Greg Bell, and let's be honest here, Greg Bell is going to be an NFL player. San Diego State has a couple guys on that team that you looked at and you said, okay, they'll be playing on Sundays. Arizona doesn't have any of those. So I think I kind of looked at it and I made the mistake of thinking to myself that San Diego State isn't at that level where they can just basically count on 8, 9, 10 wins because we're going to lose seniors. But, oh, by the way, the freshmen and the sophomores that we got warming up in the bullpen, they're going to be problems when they hit the field.
It's a natural, and it appears right now that as long as that, you're showing your youth because you're strikingly handsome on a Saturday night and still doing your job. And that's really the breakdown here. And I think that's the thing that Arizona fans are going to take out of this is just how impressive Mike Luke is. Even on any time on a Saturday night, he delivers. But as does San Diego State. And it feels like as long as that coaching staff is intact, generally speaking, and they're going to be pretty good, and they've made it a very attractive. They do a good job recruiting, obviously. And it is a pipeline thing, and that's good. It's good from San Diego State standpoint. They have had very good years. They are woefully underappreciated, I think. But to a large degree, a lot of the non-Power 5 conference college football teams probably don't get the attention that they deserve. I don't think that's necessarily any, Cincinnati's ranked 7th right now. They're really, anybody name 3 people on Cincinnati's roster?
Bob Huggins.
They really, oh, wow. Well, you name somebody on a roster. They're a team that is in another. If you're in a lesser conference, it's just going to happen because so much of the air is given to the SEC and then the other Power 5 conferences. And San Diego State plays a bunch of late games. So, and now they're playing a bunch of late games. They don't have a home stadium. They're playing in Carson this year. But it looks like the program is on very solid footing. So all of that said, obviously the issue isn't, what's going on with San Diego State, which is good. The issue for this podcast is what's going on with Arizona, which is bad. And tonight's performance was unpleasant for Wildcat fans to watch, and it didn't get any better. And one of the things that, I heard and I think is going to be discussed to some degree, and it's frankly laughable, is this quote unquote quarterback controversy that now is going to maybe, bring its head up in this program. Because Plummer led them on a touchdown drive against third stringers for San Diego State.
I'm going to let's get to that in a little bit, because I'm going to disagree with you on there, and I might be a hot take, as the kids would say.
Oh, man, and I know you love talking like the kids.
Yeah, but you know what's not a hot take, though, is Draftkings. And we've talked about it from day one, but when betting became legal in Arizona, if you weren't on Draftkings, then, quite frankly, what are you doing? They have the best deal going right now. You could put down $1 on an NFL game, Shoe. $1, and you know what? You get $200 to play with. And if you're smart, you know what you're going to do. You're basically going to ignore what Mike Luke says for advice, especially when it comes to backing the Arizona. You're going to go with what I say and say, you know what? I'm going opposite that. I'm going to go exactly with what else Mike Luke does not say right there. And that's the unique thing about DraftKings. You had made an interesting point about DraftKings, though, Shu, when you talked about how easy it is compared to some of the other sites.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot, and I'm sure a lot of these companies have looked at each other. Let's not be ridiculous. Everybody knows there's a flood of sports books out there and a flood of sports book apps. But from an intuitive standpoint, how do you navigate it? Where do you want to get to? What are some of the promotional bets? DraftKings is laid out really well, and their promotions are darn good right now. With the launch on Thursday, they are trying to get people involved and in this, and obviously we hope that you will take advantage of that.
And you know what the great thing about it too is
I think it'll be worth it for you. At least just the ability to navigate it.
It's easy. It's easy for people like us, but if you do have a little bit of an issue gambling, you can call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, and they're going to give you some of the help that you'll need. And you know what? They're there for you. One other thing too, if you're watching us right now on YouTube, if you're watching us and you're seeing us break down this game, you know what you should do? We'd like to remind you that you can basically check out any of our podcasts by subscribing to AZ Wildcats and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever the case may be. We're going to be on there. And if you're liking what you're hearing, we want to remind you that we're going to be cranking out a lot of awesome content here. You can go to gophoenix.com. And by the way, you can follow along on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Phoenix Sports. All right.
One of the things, Mike, that is interesting that has taken place and was a theme of this podcast and a theme of a lot of the discussions we've had this week was the difference between week 1 and week 2 in college football. Mm-hmm. And if you start going into hot take mode with a college football game after week 1, you're going to get it handed to you in week 2. And that has happened all across the landscape in college football, even in this conference. I think a lot of people, what was the line for BYU and Utah? I think it was 6.5. Mm-hmm. Utah was a favorite in that game.
It was at 7 for a while, yeah.
Okay, and BYU's going to whoop them, and has been whooping them all game long. We talked about how Stanford looked dreadful in game 1 and then made the mistake, maybe, of wondering what in the world was going on with that program as a whole. Because, they've had a couple down years.
They've had some down seasons, for sure.
And they did what Stanford is known for doing, punched USC in the mouth a bunch of times, and that's a 2-touchdown game, and it's been 2-touchdown game for most of it. Stanford looked really good against SC. So there are examples, and frankly, you look up the road, you're going to see a decent final with Arizona State. They weren't particularly impressive now 2 weeks in a row. They're UNLV looks okay, frankly, just from an eye test, improved from an eye test standpoint. And ASU eventually wore them down. But, that's a Pac-12 South team that a lot of us have our eyes on as being potentially in a position to have a strong season. And their first 2 non-conference games against woeful competition have not been impressive at all.
All right, so go ahead. Feel free to slap me a little bit here because you're talking about the quarterback controversy here. And you know what? I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian view when it comes to the U of A. And, when people talk about quarterback controversies at Arizona, generally there's 2 that generally come to mind, and they were when Arizona was, well, let's be honest, much better. Ortiz Jenkins, Keith Smith back in 1997 through 1999, where Arizona had a top 5 finish. Then you had Nick Foles, Matt Scott, 2 future NFL players. Gunnar Cruz and Will Plummer is not that. So that's not where I'm going.
Right.
And I've thought this from day one. When I watch Cruz, and again, I get that Plummer is going against third string guys. When Cruz has time, he basically he holds on to the ball. He doesn't look comfortable. He looks somewhat skittish. When he doesn't have time, he just throws it 55 yards out of bounds. Not blaming him for that because that's generally what you should do. All I'm saying is this, is that when Will Plummer came into the game, he looked more natural. It looked to me like he had more physical ability. It looked to me like he had a stronger arm. He looked a little bit more comfortable. Again, I get that it's against third stringers, but to me, it's not like Cruz has shown anything where you're like, What do you mean? You can't take Cruz out. You got to keep Plummer in there. I'm all for giving Plummer a chance at this point.
Oh, I don't have any problem with that at all.
Good.
And just consider last week that Cruz threw for 300 yards and put up some really good numbers. Helped Arizona move the football, and it looked like the Cats were making some adjustments. A lot of those adjustments worked against them this week, and San Diego State throttled them completely on both sides of the football. And Arizona's offensive numbers were gruesomely anemic. Now, all I'm saying as far as quarterback controversy is concerned, neither of these guys have earned the job right now. So play them both and see how they do and see if there's separation on the field. So, I don't know. I think they're both probably going to get a fair amount of reps, probably fairly equal next week against NAU. NAU is not very good from a lesser division. That's game Arizona's going to win. So you're going to have opportunities out there.
What's the spread going to be? If there is a spread, and you would go to Draftkings, obviously, to look at, what's the spread in that game going to be? I was messaging some people during the game.
Better than I do. 23, maybe?
You're so good. I thought 24.
Okay. All right. Maybe I'd open it there. There it is right there. And all I did right there, I know that you were thinking for me. So that was telepathically what was ultimately in my mind. It is incredible. But as far as the point that I'm making in terms of quote unquote controversy is that I don't think anything changes. I think, if Plummer starts next week, okay, fine. Let's see how he does. If he runs into some problems, Cruz has an opportunity to do really well. It's so early in this new process that Arizona's got to figure out what it wants to do on a lot of positions on the field. Right. Quarterback is no exception there. So, we'll see if 1 week Cruz is better. We'll see if 1 week Plummer's better. We'll see as the season progresses if one of them separates. And those opportunities will be there. If Plummer separates, if Cruz separates, they're going to get more reps.
All right. Now it is time for the stat of the game. All right. Arizona had 102 yards at the 5-minute and 13 mark of the third quarter. That in college football, where you're designed to be able to move the ball, where everything stops after a time or after a first down, where the rules are all in your favor, 102 yards with almost 40 minutes gone in a game. That's something that you generally don't see in college football between two teams that are actually Division I teams. That's a pretty rare stat there, John Schuster.
Oh, without a doubt. And it showed how much of a talent deficiency Arizona has on the offensive side of the ball. And when you've got an injury to your one player who has sort of breakaway potential in Berryhill, that just limits things so much more. Right. And, the Aztec game plan was excellent. They had better athletes to execute that game plan, and Arizona offensively could do absolutely nothing. And I think we're going to see a lot of games like that this year. This one was a little bit more frustrating because they were just completely shut down. In the BYU game, they put up good numbers, but couldn't get into the end zone, right? Which I thought might be their problem throughout the course of the year. This one was a lot worse. They couldn't stay on the field. And and if you're talking about 100 total yards with 5 minutes left in the game, what are you doing? I mean, that's a problem. San Diego State had that in 2 possessions.
When I had to look, when I first saw that stat, I had to look at it and I had to actually go and check on the stat sheet because I was thinking to myself, maybe it was like 172 yards. Maybe it was like 202, and 202 would still be lousy, but it's at least a little bit more in that ballpark where 102 is just not going to get the job done.
I think, Mike, they had 2 yards in the second half prior to the late drive.
Right, for sure. So that's going to be an issue. Now, the one thing that's not an issue, and again, we talked about it before, you should go to Draftkings because that's going to be where you can find stuff for an Arizona NAU spread, for an Arizona, whatever game you want to look at. You know what? You don't have to just bet on Arizona. You can bet on a lot of different schools. Arizona is not just the hot button issue when it comes to bettors out there. And the great thing about it, too, again, $1 on an NFL game, just so you know, to go against it. I bet $1 on on Seattle to cover 2.5 against the Colts tomorrow, which means you're probably going to want to bet on the Colts with the 2.5, or heck, you might even want to go money line or adjust that money line get an adjusted line because with the way I'm going,
you just had a tough week. That's all it is.
What?
You just had a tough week. You're going to bounce back. You're going to execute. You're going to make the right lines. You're going to go to Draftkings. You're going to see what's out there, and you're going to take advantage. You're going to be back on your feet because you're Mike Luke. I know Luke's locks. Yep. I know my limitations. I'm a cooler. I'm not very good at this whole thing. So the problem becomes one of us had better be. So I'd put my confidence in you on a much more regular basis than I would.
Wait a second,
though. Given my history,
if you've got two coolers,
do
they cancel each other out and actually make you a warmer?
It's a possibility. It's like the weird double negative thing. The problem with two coolers is if we disagree on games, then what happens?
That's a great point.
Think that's like some weird gambling vortex thing. That's just going to be a mess. And then I guess, folks, after you've opened your Draftkings app, assuming obviously that you're watching this and living in Arizona, and the other states where sports gaming is allowed, then I guess you just got to make your own choice because you ain't helping you and Luke ain't helping you because they're going in different directions. But I suspect as you watch this further on, Mike's picks are going to come around and be pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope so. But you know what? If you need a little bit of help in the meantime, go to call 1-800 or call 1-800 Next Step, and they can help you out. All right, now let's kind of wrap everything up from what we saw here. And I am going to say I did notice, and it was hard, but I did notice one good thing that I really liked, and this has happened now twice. Arizona has their players have played till the end. There hasn't been any quit. And I actually really like Jedd Fisch calling a timeout to get the ball back when they're down 38-14 with like 5 minutes left. That to me was, you know what? We're not going to win this game. That's really not even what we're going for at this point. I'm going to set a model right here. And on top of that, I'm going to show these guys that I really want to win and I really want them to get better. I thought that was a cool little thing where I think a lot of coaches, especially Kevin Sumlin, would have probably said, this game's over. Well, let's get out of here. I liked that. It showed me a guy that was looking for his team to get better, even though he knew they were going to lose.
Right. I think that's a very helpful thing. And as this season progresses, I think there are going to be some tough games ahead for Arizona, and there are going to probably be some blowouts. So, and if those string together, then that's when you're going to see just the fortitude of the team and the fortitude of the coaching staff, recognizing where they are and what they're doing. Because when you get beat down by 30 week after week after week, it gets a lot more difficult to try to bounce back. That's where the keys are going to be in place. Hey, in that regard, so far, so good. But when we get into games, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, and if this becomes a habit, we'll see how much fight the Arizona football team has. Hopefully that answer is a lot.
Okay, now here's my next question. How much fight does the fan base have? Because
the fan base is done.
I think the same thing, because I think this was their one opportunity to show out against a team like a San Diego State. And, Jedd Fisch went and he went to the frat houses. They showed all of that. And when you're down 21-0 with about 6 minutes left in the first quarter or 8 minutes left in the first quarter, for people that are already looking for a reason not to show up, I think Arizona's in a situation now where you're going to have to win games in order for these fans to show up. I think they're very much they're in the show me state right now.
They're not just in the show me state. They're in apathyville. And that's the worst town.
That's worse than being mad.
Yeah,
it is.
Unquestionably. No, because now look at it from the student standpoint. The students come in here kind of laughing off. Arizona's football. It's kind of funny. They're not very good. Oh, wacky, haha. We see them at parties. That's all great. But in the end, Arizona football is just not very good. Same old Arizona football. So of course they're going to leave at the half for the rest of the home games. And the community isn't even going to bother. The amount of interest in Arizona football is done for I think probably the remainder of the year. They're not going to draw good numbers. They're not, it's not, you hope that they can pull off a really nice upset somewhere along the line, maybe a few times. And I think just because this game was as bad as it was doesn't mean the entire thing is unraveled. Again, I'm a firm believer this is a long-term investment, and we're talking 3 or 4 years at least.
Right.
You know, and so it's important to be patient. But the fan base has fan base is apathetic. The fan base has no interest in being patient. The fan base sort of passingly maybe watches Arizona football, but they don't care what's said. They don't care what's, particularly talked about. They don't care what's printed. It's just like, okay. It's probably just the way it's going to be. If it happens to be on the background, that's fine. Am I really going to go to Arizona Stadium to check out a game? Hardcores will, which is great. It's great to have hardcores.
Our guy Nate Rady will show up, and
our pal Nate Rady was there tonight and frustrated.
And Low Tone Capone, which is a great name, says, any chance Jedd reaches out to the frats again? I would assume he will, but you know what? It's going to be interesting to see what the frats say, because this is a two-way street at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they'll show up in the first half, but it's going to be kind of laughable if Arizona gets blown out in home games. Right. And now that's going to change if Arizona wins games, but that's what this comes down to. Arizona's going to string together a lot of wins. Is Arizona going to string together a lot of wins in year one? No. We know the answer to that. Is Arizona going to string together a lot of wins in year two? Probably not. So you're looking at the athletic department having to deal with low attendance for the foreseeable future. And they have to win. And when they win, more people are going to come. But that's the time, and this is not Jedd Fisch's fault. The time of being faithful, and we believe that Arizona is, we'll be there from the beginning, is just done. This fan base does not have that mentality.
Well, and you know what?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say that I hope that our fan base out here on AZ Wildcats has a little bit more of a stick-to-itiveness with us, because we're going to be here with you. We're going to be breaking down everything. We're going to be with you throughout the week, every post game. And you know what? If you like what you see, you should subscribe to us on YouTube, any Apple, Spotify, anywhere you can find a podcast at AZ Wildcats. And you know what? You can follow along on Twitter, the entire company, the Go Phoenix company at Phoenix_sports. But Shu, it's gonna be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see where we go from here, but I think we're kind of in the same we're kind of in an agreement here that, you know what, this was a game that Arizona needed to win to impress the fan base. That obviously didn't happen, and you're kind of looking at probably some apathy setting in. One thing that I did want to say, though, is that we're going to have some special stuff coming up this week. Lute Olson's ceremony is tomorrow, and I'll be down there taking some videos, and that's obviously with Arizona football. It's not Arizona basketball, and you've got a lot of stories because you covered Lute Olson very, very closely for the majority of his career. So looking forward to that. But for John Schuster, I'm Mike Luke. Thanks a ton for listening in to the postgame show, and we will be back with you next week.